And we're live.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever in the world you are. It is a special, and did I say special broadcast? We have none other than Ken the Shotgun Schortgen, aka the Professor himself. We have London Paul. We have W, the Intelligence Insider. We're trying to get Jim Willie, but there's some technical issues there that's going on that he could not be on with us. And we have himself, El Cuco, CJ, the producer, in the working in the backgrounds and participating in this whole entire segment. I guess CJ will be narrating this whole entire thing. And you have yours truly, the monetary monkey of mayhem, and we're going to be going through a litany of topics centered around, especially the recent events that are happening in the Middle East, North Korea, the world over. So without further ado, CJ, take it away.
Yeah, I want to thank our participants today. I think everyone knows that, I do apologize to Jim Willie. We try to get him on, apologize to our audience, but it was just so important to get a very diverse group together to talk about the events that are occurring, in particular focus on the Middle East with the Saudis. So London Paul, Ken, VW, thank you so much. We're going to jump right into it, and we're going to just go ahead and start with opening remarks, and we'll go ahead and jump right ahead and go with Ken Schortgen Jr., please.
Good morning, at least coming out here from Phoenix. Yeah, it's been really fascinating seeing the geopolitical things that have been going on, the Saudi purge, the meetings over in Asia and China. One of the things I want to touch upon, I guess first, just as a teaser, is something I'm seeing a dichotomy between the way China is building things and the way that the U.S. is, and that's something I want to go forward to, especially when I get to my segment. But I think we're starting to see the real paradigm shift. We're starting to see the players move into their assorted sides, and unfortunately, this may end up in more war and conflict than we could possibly imagine.
Absolutely, absolutely. So if you want to go ahead and just jump in and provide, your perspective of what's happening, and then, just the floor is yours, and then we'll open it up. Here probably give you about 10, 12 minutes. We'll open it up for follow-up Q&A from our panel.
Cool. Yeah, one of the things I just wrote about earlier this morning was, China just got done with their singles annual holiday. And one of the things that Alibaba is doing that Amazon is not, is Alibaba is not seeking to do a takeover and consolidation of businesses and companies. It's almost like Alibaba is following the same methodology as Beijing is with the Silk Road. By this, what they're doing is they're trying to create the platforms as an internet portal to then allow businesses large and small to be under that one umbrella and work on an even playing field. What we've seen with Amazon earlier this year, of course, they took over Whole Foods. They want to automate it. They want to kill jobs, and then they want to cut costs and try to kill out competition. And I think this is one of the significant things. The reason I point to this example is because this is one of the significant things that's going to draw countries as well as corporations and businesses more into the Eurasian economic side, as well as the Chinese and ASEAN side. And I think that's what's going to happen too, going forward with a lot of the European countries, or at least even the ancillary NATO or EU countries that are trying to find ways, maybe even for the UK as they leave the European Union, try to find ways that they can transition immediately into some type of trade partnership, that they don't have to have that that time of vacuum as they leave their current spots. The reason this is also significant is you see it what Saudi Arabia is doing. Saudi Arabia is getting rid of many of their pro-Western factions in the government to prepare the way for China to get that big piece of Aramco and then start in motion a number of different things to take down the petrodollar. I find it ironic that President Trump sort of made a call over to MBS and say, hey, you know what, you ought to do the IPO over in the United States. But I think it was just a token thing. Knows the writings on the wall that that's going to be moving to the Chinese side, because in reality, after what Congress did in allowing lawsuits to be made against Saudi Arabia for 9/11, as well as freezing assets, treasuries and all that, I really don't think the United States has any standing. And what we're seeing right now, you can almost take a look at what's going on in the world as sort of a turmoil, a bubbling below the surface, ready to explode. And I almost look at that as the parallel of what's going on in the gold markets. For the last 3 weeks, we've pretty much seen a range. It starts to go up. They tamp it down, but they can't get below that range, the 1290, 1265. I think that's what we're seeing overall in many of the different nations and economies in the world. It's just a bubbling below the surface. Everything's staying stagnant, and it's waiting for one big thing to erupt. And what that's going to be, I don't know if it's going to be before the end of the year, but I think it's pretty assured it's going to be before the end of spring of next year.
Very good. London Paul, any commentary on that?
Yeah, well, I think in terms of something big happening, I hate to be drawn on dates. I've always said everything's event driven, which it most certainly is. But there, I mean, we'll get it. Well, obviously, when I do my bit about talking about Saudi Arabia and how it integrates, there's certainly definitely an integration as to what's going on there with other parts of the world, and there's been a big play to do with the sealed indictments. I think it's far bigger than perhaps anyone actually realizes, and where it encompasses. And that could be a major kind of kill shot moment, depending on who is indicted and what they're indicted for. That could break the dam. It doesn't even have to necessarily be a financial event or even a major geopolitical event, because it's the one thing, if they do indict umpteen, what I would call cabal players and major cabal players, that's going to wake up, for example, if it happens in the US, it will wake the American people up with a jolt. So that could have a huge knock-on effect. There's certainly all the geopolitical things. There's all the economic things. And likewise, I don't want to get drawn on dates, but I do think that something is likely, certainly, to happen. It might happen before the end of the year, but certainly I think when Ken said by spring next year, it's quite likely. But I'm not going to be drawn on dates, because people always go, well, it never happened, and you said this would happen. But I think that kind of timescale is definitely the case. And in terms of nations rapidly reorientating themselves in terms of the One Belt, One Road, and in terms of trading with China, you're already seeing, obviously, that sort of wave has spread all the way from the east. It's been embraced in the Middle East, and now European nations, as much as they can do, are certainly embracing the Chinese revolution, and at some point they'll embrace the Russian revolution in terms of their reintegration into Europe, which is most certainly going to happen. But that's some way off at the moment. But the way events are happening, a lot of things could happen very, very quickly. Shouldn't overlook. It doesn't mean we have this slow grinding process. There's a lot of things bubbling which may suddenly cause this massive acceleration to happen. And at some point, the dam will break. And once the dam breaks, a whole bunch of things will happen. Yeah, all sort of simultaneously, I guess.
V, your thoughts?
I agree with both London Paul as well as Ken. I've been saying for quite some time. In fact, I think going back to 2013, there's an old article I wrote in 2013 called "Blood in the Sand" about the quagmire that is the outhouse of Saud. Later on, flash forward about a year or two later, a lot of the things that I was writing about, and a lot of things that guys like Ken, London Paul, Jim Willie, W, a lot of other individuals who are keen and privy to the goings on was connected to the Saudi royals, confirmed a lot of what was going on within the kingdom, within the power play that was made by King Salman and MBS. What exactly is MBS's grander strategy in that region? To me, right now, remains a bit of a wild card. It remains a bit of befuddled at the moment, because Yes, Bandar Bush has been arrested, and he's a major, major cabal member, major neocon. Yes, Merkin, the chief rival, somebody who has British intel fingerprints all over himself, was killed in a quote unquote helicopter accident. But then at the same time, you see the coddling of MBS with Netanyahu, the whole entire Zionist regime that is in Israel. This is the obsolete politicians that are in the Likud. So it remains a bit of a wild card. But on the other side of that wild card, you have MBS and the Saudis warming up to a potential China Aramco deal, maybe an IPO in Shanghai rather than Wall Street or London. I mean, let's be honest here. If they wanted to roll out an Aramco IPO, which would have really put I think it would have done a lot for the oil markets in terms of bringing up the price of the markets. They could have done it in London or in New York, and they chose to just drag it out this long. Uh, I think something's afoot because even though all the rhetoric is out there in terms of here he is, he's threatening his air forces to go, provocating the Iran thing. How much of that is smokescreen? How much of that is reality? Because there is no strategic foothold that the Israelis and even the Americans, the American deep state has in the Middle East that can't be undone by a meat grinder called Hezbollah, that can't be undone by a meat grinder that is with a checkmate that's being performed by the Russians as well as the Chinese. So it remains to be seen. I think there's a lot of things to be looking at here. There's a lot of things that remain at play here, and for me personally, it's a wait and see moment, but very interesting nonetheless.
W, your thoughts?
Well, I, of course, have been communicating with everybody behind the scenes for quite some time, and a little bit out in the front that I was picking a date for sort of a start of all of this, which I think at the end of the day we did hit. I said the 28th of October to November 6th, 7th, and said that clear back last spring. And for that was just the dynamics with all the politics, all the various politicians. Now, there's plenty of other things that have to happen, but they have got the ball rolling now. Do we want to pick hard dates, from this point forward? No, there's there's a dynamic that's taking place. And so part of what's going on here, this potential explosion, it's the bomb put right in your face. And then the negotiations. Well, okay, this bomb can go off, or we can decide to cooperate here or do this or whatever. And so the problem is the materials that we're working with here are highly volatile. And so even the people holding the bombs in each other's face, it's like everybody has a pin pulled on a grenade and they're all holding it, waiting to throw it into the middle of the ring for all of them. Things go haywire. There's opportunities for miscalculation, and this could blow up in unexpected ways at unexpected moments. And so we're all sitting on this bomb. And at the end of the day, for most everybody in the West, the problem is, apart from being properly positioned, if you're exposed to dollars, when it finally does go, when the music stops, if you will, in this game that's being played, ultimately it's the dollar that's going to be moved off the table, and other currencies are going to become the currencies of choice. And so the real issue in the Middle East, because that's where the energy and petrodollar flows from, and that's what ultimately this is all about, is a change of who's in charge in the currencies on the planet, or how they're controlled and manipulated. That's what's on the table at the end of the day, and that's what everybody is kind of knows. This change is going to happen. How are they going to be positioned after this move from the dollar? Because the dollar is what's on the line.
Okay, I want to go ahead and go back to London Paul and give London Paul an opportunity to provide his great insights in terms of geopolitical events. London Paul, I yield the floor to you, sir.
Right. Okay. Thank. Well, I think we'll focus on Saudi. Clearly, in Saudi, there's two camps. There's the petrodollar US cabal, keep the status quo as it is camp, and then you have the petro yuan rotating east to Russia China camp. And in the latter, he is looking to definitely reform Saudi Arabia. He is looking to rotate east to Russia China and adopt the petro yuan. And the purge was to clear the Kabbalists out of Saudi Arabia. And the beneficial effect from this is they've frozen huge amounts of, we're talking hundreds of billions of assets, which have links to the Bushes and the Clintons. Now, the problem that MBS has is, rather like Trump has had, poor advisors, in that Trump was brainwashed into believing that Iran is the mortal enemy of the US, and so has MBS. And of course, we had the Riyadh missile attack, which wasn't the Houthis. It was actually Langley. And of course, they convinced MBS that, in fact, this was an attack by, i.e., the Houthis, i.e., Hezbollah, and ultimately Iran. And we even had the ridiculous notion that the missile that landed had somehow had Iranian fingerprints all over it. I mean, as though Iran would stamp a missile made in Tehran on it and launch it into Riyadh. I mean, it's absolutely farcical. Now, I wrote the article talking about this false flag that I sort of telegraphed could happen and been blamed on Iran. So, for example, sinking a US vessel in the Persian Gulf, blaming Iran and then using it as a pretext to go to war. And that would be from the US standpoint. That is simply, yeah, they may try to do it, but the US is not going to stomach trying to go to war with Iran because they know what the consequences are. Now, the problem MBS has also is he's responsible for going into Qatar, Yemen, and also now there's this potential risk of what's going on with Lebanon. So he's going to have to eradicate and get his way out of that mess. Now, we've already seen potentially how Qatar's gone rather quiet. And I think it's some way they're going to try and back out of that. Yemen is a very difficult problem. It could be easily resolved. But the problem that MBS has with respect to that is that he's in the process of clearing what you would call the Kabbalists out of the Saudi or the House of Saud. So he's in it, also got to get to the point where he removes these people and is then strong enough to back out. I think undoubtedly there were big mistakes to go in the first place, and he will ultimately, I suppose, take responsibility. But once again, it's extremely poor advice. Now, the thing with Israel is, and Netanyahu is pretty close to being taken down himself in his own country. There's a lot of risk that he's going to get indicted on criminal charges. I absolutely believe Netanyahu's time is numbered. I'm not saying when he's going to go, because I don't think anyone in the Israeli military wants to actually have a war with anybody. The Lebanese certainly don't want a war with anybody. Neither does the Iranians or Hezbollah. I mean, why would Hezbollah want a war? They're in the buck seat. They've in control in Syria from their own perspective. They've made assistance in Iran, in Iraq. And if you look at it, Lebanon's they have a pretty strong stake in the Lebanese government. So the argument is they have this free reign practically all the way through from the Mediterranean right across to the Middle East. So they're in no mood to have war. That doesn't mean there isn't a risk of it, because there are still elements within Lebanon, there's elements within Saudi who are desperate for war, and there's elements, obviously, the neocons in the US are desperate for war. Now, if you'd asked me 2 or 3, 4 days ago what the risk was, I think the risk was high. I think the risk now of a war starting is diminishing. It doesn't mean it can't suddenly resurface and become a problem again, but I don't think it's as big a problem as it was. Now, there are some strange kind of conflicting issues with this, with the Lebanese Prime Minister Hariri, I think you pronounce it, but maybe someone knows how you actually pronounce it. Now, there is something very peculiar that he gets summoned, goes back to Saudi, effectively announces his resignation, and then starts mouthing off this anti kind of Hezbollah Iranian rhetoric. Now, I'm not exactly sure who was behind why they did this. Was this an MBS tactic? It seems unlikely. Is it someone in the Saudi government? Most certainly. But the interesting talk is he under house arrest? Some people are saying he is. 1 minute he is, the next minute he isn't. And then, of course, the issue is now there's talk that he's going to go back to Lebanon and officially resign. Now, that's fine if he can go back and do this. It's how much does he destabilize? I think that's the whole name of the game. Israel's not going to directly now just go walk into Lebanon and launch a war. There's no way they're going to do that. But if you have a civil war and it becomes unstable, then there may be some pretext further down the line that they can do this. That's the game. Israel's not going to start butting off against Hezbollah again. They got their nose bloodied in 2006, and it's going to be far greater if they try to attempt to do that again. I think part of this, as much as anything, is Netanyahu trying to cling on to power. And it's what leaders do when they're weak. They'll try and go and launch a war in some other country or try and start a conflict because it's their only way to they feel to survive internally. I think actually it's hugely detrimental for him to try to do that. So I'm not ruling out and saying we don't have a risk of a war developing, but I think it's less likely than it was. And of course, who ultimately is going to be behind MBS? You can guarantee Russia and China. It's exactly the same as what's happened in North Korea. North Korea has gone extremely quiet. Why? Because we know for a fact Russia and China have had back-channel communications with Kim Jong-un, telling him to rein it in. But equally, the US were warned. I know we spoke about this quite a number of times. We're basically told, look, if you decide to start launching a preemptive strike, your entire fleet in the South China Sea will be sunk to the bottom of the ocean. And they were warned about it. That's why you've had both sides backing off. It's also an indication why the whole Trump-Putin thing in Vietnam, a lot was made, while they didn't really speak, well, privately, yes, they did. There's a large, broad agreement, and we spoke earlier, basically Trump's got a decision to make. In one sense is, look, you're either with us, with Russia and China in changing the world, rolling the multipolar world out, or you're against us. And if you try and, in any way stab us in the back, we'll stab you in the head, the shoulders, the heart, and everywhere, and we'll finish your nation off. And they have the wherewithal to do that, particularly China economically. But they don't want to do that. It's in no one's interest. And Trump knows this. The problem he's got is the swamp. And we come back to full circle in that regard to why Saudi Arabia is in part doing what they're doing. Yeah, they're cleaning house, but in the process, it's going to do Trump a massive favor in draining the swamp. Why? Because it cuts the money supply off. And this is, in a way, a kind of little preemptive exercise in, well, if we're going to take on the capitalists globally, how easy is it for us to seize their assets and seize their money and prevent and arrest them? Well, actually, Saudi's proved it's a lot easier than people perhaps anticipated. But there are consequential effects because we know how closely Saudi's tied to the US, and in regard of the Bushes and the Clintons. So it's a kind of double whammy which has beneficial effects for the US, and this may be why all this ties in with these sealed indictments that there is a lot of rumors about. I think there's definitely substance to it. It may be far bigger than we realize and have far bigger players in the process than perhaps we anticipate. But this is all interconnected. It's certainly why Trump went along, and yes, he had this great meeting with Xi and said, well, there's all these deals on the table. Yeah, in principle, but they're MOUs. The real reality is the US turns its back on the cabal. It plays ball with Russia, China, and unravels and to the multipolar world. China and Russia will back them, and China will back all these deals. And it's rather like Trump knows the dollar's dead. The dollar has to go. It's an inescapable fact that while you have the dollar, the cabal will never be fully gone. Once the dollar goes, the question is, okay, what replaces it? And the issue is, if the US cooperate, there's intelligent ways that the US can circumnavigate many of the problems, which would result from losing the FR and having to adopt an undoubted devalued treasury simply because they don't have things to back their currency. But that can be worked in cooperation with Russia, China, because they know full well destroying the US economy, destroying European economies was never their intention. And this is why people get frustrated and go, well, why didn't they just do this? Why didn't they just pull the plug on things? Well, they could have pulled the plug 7 or 8 years ago, but it wasn't the time to do it, from their own perspective internally. But also, what would be the point? If they can get the US on side and they think Trump's capable of doing that, And I think the draining the swamp might be one of the most interesting developments that we see, not necessarily in the next month, it might be, but in the very foreseeable future, we're talking a matter of months. I think we may see some significant developments, which will also highlight what's going on in Saudi. But no one's resting on their laurels. There are risks, and we shouldn't underestimate the risk of some major event still happening in the Middle East, but it's certainly a lot less of a problem than it was even a few days ago. And we'll see what happens when Hariri returns to Lebanon, as it's expected to be, and what unfolds. But it's something we have to pay attention to on a regular basis. Just finally, in terms of the Aramco IP, China is absolutely in the buck seat with this. They're the major player with this, not the US. I think Trump, as Ken said, it was kind of tokenism. Maybe it's a bit like, well, we're trying to help you, you're trying to help us. Maybe we could have a piece of the action, but it's extremely unlikely. China will take a far bigger chunk in that deal than even is admitted. If they say 5%, it'll be considerably higher.
Right. Great insights, Paul. Really appreciate that. Ken Schortgen Jr., any follow-up questions or commentary on that?
Yeah, one of the things that I find fascinating this is Dr. Jim has mentioned many times before, and I believe Paul has, is that Saudi Arabia has very little reserves. I mean, Aramco is really a symbol. It's a symbol of the petrodollar. It really has nothing to do with the future of oil production and all that. And so this is why, the Aramco thing, really what it is Saudi Arabia is putting this up as a token to sell the highest bidder which side they're going to go on. You give us money, we're not going to really give you a whole lot in oil production over the course of time, but we are going to give our allegiance to you. And Saudi Arabia is strong enough and as a central point in the Middle East that it's more of a geopolitical benefit than it is actual oil. And with that being said, it's kind of really fascinating, and getting back to what I mentioned about, by the end of the year, early spring, what I'm looking at a lot of the things is the cycles, the 100-year cycle. We're almost going through an almost absolute parallel of what took place in the 20th century. The rise of populism. Many of the nation states that are involved today are the same ones that were involved during World War I. But one of the significant things that happened at the end of World War I was we saw the fall of 3 different empires. The Austro-Hungarian, the Ottoman, which led to what we see in the Middle East today, and of course the Habsburg, or not the Frederick the Great, the Prussian Empire. So we saw the fall of that. Well, there's really only one serious empire in play right today, and if it wasn't for World War I, then the United States would have never become a world power. Now we're starting to see the fall of that empire, and we're starting to see the rise of populism all across the world, and the desire for multipolarism versus unipolarism. So that's why I think there's so many different things. It's almost like I don't want to get too much into the cosmic here, but it's almost like there's a frequency shift going around, that things are happening where people and nations and governments no longer have control, and it's pushing towards a certain point that the outcome is going to be you can either ride the wave, which Germany, France, and especially some of the European countries have to do. Iran, ironically, and Turkey are slowly succeeding because they're riding the wave. They're recognizing where the future is going, and they're willing to give up at the potential cost of war or terrorist attacks on them. They're willing to go to the new side. Now, they're not doing it because of altruism, but they're doing it because of survival. And with that being said, the thing about Russia, and Paul said the perfect timing. They could have done this 7 years ago when they did when Russia and China did the first oil agreement, but they're doing it now because both nations have really grown and solidified. They built the infrastructures, they've built the financial systems to be able to disconnect. And what is this thing about Russia? Russia is out of debt. Their currency is now one of the strongest in the world. They've lowered their inflation, and their government under Putin is no longer one where you have opposition. You've got the majority of people who are backing Putin and the general direction he's going. So with that being said, you have two world leaders. Xi Jinping has just solidified his consolidation of power. You have two nations that are willing to go and do this paradigm shift, and they have their entire public behind them, as opposed to the United States, where we're so divided. In Europe, where it's so divided that they're really not going to get full support if they try to do their own type of gambit to hold on to power.
Actually, just something you may mention, Ken, to do with the old empires that's worth mentioning. There's actually going to be a swing in Europe back, in some sense, to the old empires and inverted commas that we saw pre-World War One. We're already seeing indications of the Austro-Hungarian Empire as it was, and nations starting to form, groups that are looking at the future and wanting to work and cooperate together. And that's ironically the whole purpose of World War One. Well, there was two reasons: to destroy all the monarchies, destroy all the empires, and destroy the czars and foment the Russian Revolution, impose Western cabal communism to create the ultimate kind of bogeyman in the East. And we're going to see a complete turnaround where, certainly within Europe, I can't say so much what will happen with the Ottoman Empire, but definitely in that regard, you're going to see a return of nations starting to work as they did in, well, like Austria and Hungary, etc., and Slovenia, Croatia, etc. And those kind of old empires are going to come back in a way that how the European Union should be, where nations trade, cooperate, not the Brussels kind of European Union, but a new sort of purpose-built European Union. So that's the kind of irony, is where we're sort of going to come back to in that regard, to do with the old empires.
Yeah, and if you think about it, what was one of the labels that ISIS called itself? The Islamic Caliphate. Isn't that what the Ottoman Empire was? One of its labels was the Islamic Caliphate. So you have a repeat of all these different things. And if, really, while the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand did not fully start, wasn't the purest catalyst, because really Europe was preparing for war with their alliances for a long time. It was because Serbia wanted, in a populist movement, wanted to break away from the empire. And this rise of populism is really what was the catalyst from about 1914 all the way through World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Ken, you broke up on us.
Oh, did I? Okay, yeah, I think I said my piece.
So. Okay, all right, great. Excellent. V, any thoughts on that?
I mean, very, very, very valid points brought upon by the gentleman here. I agree with him wholeheartedly. The only thing I'd like to flesh out is again reaffirm to the audience that from every possible conceivable strategic angle, I see no other escape from this emerging multipolar world. And I don't think this is I don't even think at this point it's an emerging multipolar world. It is here. It's here. Its infrastructures are here. Its rudiments and its accoutrements are here. Everything is out in full open display. And we're just waiting for the necessary pieces, the last remaining vestiges of the old system to be done away with. And we, be fully integrated into this new system that I think is going to be fair and equitable for the whole entire world and for any nation that participates in it. And again, my hope is that, the United States is not a nation that sits on the outside looking in, isolated because we're paying for the sins of morons and charlatans and sycophants who squandered our wealth, extracted our wherewithal, and left us with absolutely nothing. And that is my hope, is that, we too can, break free the shackles of quote unquote the deep state and partake of what this new multipolar world is, what it's all about. And we see it being spearheaded by statesmen, guys. And that's the key point I think Ken brought up earlier before we even went live. Talked about statesmen as opposed to the scum-sucking politicians that we have running much of the Western world.
Do you know what, V? I have to say, because we've talked a lot about this, as everyone else has. I'm actually, after Trump's visit and recent developments, I'm more encouraged that the US has a chance now to embrace the multipolar world. There's a lot of challenges ahead in terms of draining the swamp, or the cesspit, as I refer to, but I actually think the US has a better chance than it's had in quite a long time. Maybe the next few weeks, if there is indictments, maybe this is the thing that will kickstart the big change in the US. I'm not saying it will, but there is a good possibility that that might be the starting process. I don't believe for 1 minute Trump's bumbling around in the dark and isn't aware of things that are going on. What's definitely the case is that the attempt to drain the swamp, when I called it Plan B, was it was taken out the hands of the White House. It was taken out the hands of Trump. Trump, yeah, he comes out with his comments on Twitter and he makes comments in public, but the people who are draining the swamp are not people inside the White House. Now, there's a body of powerful Americans who want an end to this madness because they know the damage it's done to the US internally, the damage it's doing externally. And I'm more confident that we may reach a turning point, and we may actually find out in the next few months or maybe sooner that we are really seeing that turning point. And if it does, the world, Russia, China will embrace the US, and the world needs a strong US. It needs all nations to be strong, but a weak, crippled United States is not good for the world, and it's not clearly good for the American people, because how many years is it going to take to rectify the massive problems that will ensue? So, yeah, I'm cautious. I have some cautious optimism, and we all want America to be a strong nation that is not controlled by the cabal, the deep state, whatever you want to call it. And maybe we're just seeing a glimmer of light that, in fact, that is possibly now going to become a reality.
W.
CJ?
Bad time. Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, I thought you dropped off.
Drop off.
I guess you passed the ball to W.
No, W's here. There you go. W. Wanted to give you an opportunity to jump in. We're not picking up any audio from you, W, for some reason. Your mute's off, but your mic's not coming through.
Actually, I can hear him fine.
Oh, I can't hear him. Maybe he's got to give another beer to the hamsters that are running his PC.
Why don't we go ahead and we'll go ahead and go to V next to share his perspective on the recent geopolitical events, and his insights of what's going on. So V, yield the floor to you, sir.
I mean, the biggest hot topic button right now is it is the Middle East. I'm trying to figure out, one of the things that W spoke about, maybe a little over a year ago, was this coming shift to the situation with Hezbollah. And I would bust his chops about that, saying, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. But sure as hell, we're here right now with that situation. The question becomes is, what can be the possible outcome of this whole entire charade? And I don't think it's going to end well. I think the cabal has no cards left to play. They're not even believable. They can't even come out and say, hey, you know what? A Russian hack caused the stock market to collapse and all your wealth has been wiped out. No one's going to believe that. No one trusts these guys no more. And that's the whole entire thing. And that's why I think these guys are done. I think these globalists are finished. I think these guys have, they're out of options. It's a decentralized world. We're proving with cryptocurrencies. We're proving with gold and silver. We're proving with decentralization in so many sectors and industries that we don't need them. We don't need them at all for anything. That they are obsolete. They're the ones that are being replaced. They're the ones who have been, and their ideas are the things that have been turned into the soylent green, and not us. Think about it. Everything from smartphones and social media, which they thought would enslave us, has become the pitchforks and torches that we're using to burn down their kingdoms and their castles, and to cast to the ground their monoliths and monuments that they've erected to themselves to project their own power. It's an exciting time to be alive, nonetheless, CJ. And I, for once, see this whole entire thing marching forward without any sort of stop. I just want the American public to be widely awakened to this and to break free from any sort of programming, any sort of childish adolescent, rah rah, let's go Team USA mentality. It's about the new multipolar world. It's about us having a seat at the table, and I think that's the most important thing here.
Hey, this is W here. Are you
Very good, very good. Ken, any follow-up commentary or questions on that?
No, it's interesting you say that because, what is one of the trends that's really starting to happen? Well, the millennial generation that's coming up, one of the things that they're demanding is authentic. And fiat currencies, the paper markets, even up to a point, cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies to me were sort of like a rebellious movement within this populist movement going on as a way to try to get at the system. But in the end, I think it's going to be a demand for authentic. And that's why I believe in the long run, why China and Russia are backing this and why it's going to be a return is going to be a gold standard. Cryptocurrencies and the blockchain than cryptocurrencies per se are going to be the important thing. The reason cryptocurrencies are going to be important, especially what Russia is doing and what China is doing, is because we now run contrary to whether you're for globalism or not. We are the entire world is tied together with communications, with the internet and all that. Everything is fast paced now. You can't, unless there's a global worldwide EMP or a solar flare, you can't put that genie back in the box. So with that being said, everything is going to be deemed to be fast paced. And the way that you transfer money today using the antiquated system of bonds to do trade versus the blockchain and cryptocurrencies, that's going to be the wave of the future. But what it's going to have to be is it's going to have to be backed by something. And I think that's why Dr. Jim Willey's gold trade note, the use of currencies that are going to be backed by gold using a cryptocurrency and blockchain type system, that's going to be the future, because I truly believe one of the things that people are going to demand when this whole thing shuttles out is a return to the authentic and the return to tangible, not simply electronic blips or paper leverage manifesting itself as real money.
Right. London Paul, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd echo what Ken's just said. You're going to see the end of the fiat dollar complex to be replaced by sound money. So there is going to be gold-backed currencies. Mexico may back their currency with silver. That's a distinct possibility. But certainly asset-backed currencies, cryptocurrencies. I mean, I stated the case for a while that would roll out their own cryptocurrencies. They'll be asset-backed. We're now seeing that's becoming a reality, and they're much further down the track than they admit. As they always do, when they tell you they're doing something, they've already done it. They're just fine-tuning things. We'll see, and they will be probably gold-backed as well. That doesn't mean you'll see the end of the ruble or the end of the yuan or the renminbi. You will just see it as an ancillary way of trade. And some people won't like it because they'll say it's centralized, but asset-backed cryptocurrencies will coexist with non-asset-backed cryptocurrencies. Whether people like that or not doesn't really matter. That's the reality. Depends to what extent asset-backed cryptocurrencies grab the market and become utilized, for example, in international trade, as just one small example. So definitely, as Ken said, you'll see the end of fake money. You'll end of the end of the fake currencies, the fake markets, the fake derivatives, which is, as someone once coined the phrase, they're weapons of mass financial destruction, and absolutely they have been. So that is what will underpin the financial system. I think from my concern, I raised it earlier, is I don't have problems with current cryptocurrencies. I don't have any issue with blockchain. They're very much the future. My concern is manipulation that currently goes on. And the question is, who's playing the game in this regard? And as much as decentralized as it has been, we are seeing manipulation going on. Now, that problem may be eradicated and disappear in the fullness of time, because the gold and silver market is equally horrendously manipulated, as we know. That at some point will stop. Maybe we'll see the same thing happen, but I do have concerns about that. But I'm, contrary to anyone who thinks otherwise, I'm very pro cryptocurrencies. I'm very pro blockchain. I just have a different perspective, but they very much are here to stay, and they will revolutionize the financial world without any shadow of a doubt. We're going to see a very different world in terms of banks, how central banks operate, and undoubtedly the idea that all these, but there are certain people out there saying, cryptocurrencies are a flash in the pan, they're going to disappear. Same with blockchain. Absolutely not. That is absolutely crystal clear that it will be not, quite the contrary. So I think on that basis that we look forward to a more equitable world that operates under the auspices of a multipolar world, which V's right. We talk about emerging. It's probably just barely emerging in the Western world, but certainly in large parts of the world, it already exists. So, yeah, I'm very optimistic. I always have been since 2012. I said the cabal's finished. It's just a matter of when, not if. And 5 years or more later, I stand by that, and I'm extremely confident that we're now a lot closer than we were 5 years ago, for sure.
Are you
W? Did your audio? Are you back?
Well, I refreshed.
Text message and let him know that we can't pick up his audio.
You're not getting
He's
it all.
Still in the Hangout. I just don't. No one else can hear him either.
Yeah, I can hear W actually fine.
Huh? I think it's your.
Yeah, I'm unable to hear him. I think sometimes I just get a reverberation. Hey, one thing I wanted to touch upon, what Paul just said, was in relation to cryptocurrencies. The thing about it is right now the only thing cryptocurrencies are, they're being traded. They're not being used, and
Yes.
Their only relation is in regards to the value of other fiat currencies. Until I start seeing cryptocurrencies that are valued in relation to products and services, then I really can't put it in the same line as currency or money, because it's like when you get price discovery of goods and services, it can be in regards to any given sovereign currency. But right now, nobody is pricing things in relation to Bitcoin. What people have to do is they have to take their dollars, they go buy Bitcoin, they go buy a third-party conduit like a Monex Visa type debit card, and then they use that debit card to purchase something in dollars or euros or whatever, and then that third-party conduit does the conversions. Well, why go through all the 5 steps when you could just take your dollars and euros and buy the product? You go into a store like Starbucks or Target or wherever, things are not priced in Bitcoin. Things are priced in dollars, euros, yen, etc. So until, for right now, what everybody, when you listen to most people talk about, Bitcoin's going to go to $10,000. It's going to go to $1 million. Okay, well, then one is not wealth protection. It's trading it as a equity or security. So what Bitcoin has sort of evolved into right now is simply a speculative asset. And that's why I think in the long run, there will be decentralized private cryptocurrencies for some type of function. But the only stability and getting rid of the volatility is going to be eventually the crypto ruble that's being built, the digital RMB that's being put on right now, because one, that's going to cut out the volatility, but everything is going to find utilization and price discovery in those sovereign cryptocurrencies, where you're not seeing it now in the regular private decentralized cryptocurrencies.
V, your thoughts on that? I'm going to get right back to W here in just a moment, because apparently it sounds like the issue may be on my end. I'll tell you what, W, why don't you go ahead?
I just signed in differently. Let's see if that works.
Okay.
I can hear you.
perfectly now.
All right, wonderful.
Okay, well, we're going to yield some time to you because I feel bad I couldn't hear you. But W, I know that it was a long time. You probably had a lot to say, so I yield the floor to you.
Well, the guys have great points. One of the things that I think came out a couple times is that the cabal, those people behind the scenes that are manipulating some of these events, haven't gone away. Got to think about this for a minute. We have the wealthiest group in the world behind the scenes that is these hidden hands that actually manipulate governments. They're not without the ability to anticipate changes coming or to try to prepare for that. They've prepared a path forward. So it's this Hegelian dialectic, problem, crisis, solution. So a lot of these problems that are becoming now crises, while they look like they've just happened, in fact, have been engineered to occur. Uh, uh, and of course, going back to World War I, which was mentioned, the assassination that occurred that everybody says started World War One, the fields were ripe for that war. The tinder was very dry, and that was just the event that was used to bring the rest of the broad public to a particular response. We are looking at a situation, going back to the Mideast specifically, where all the parties are on a hair trigger, and it's ready to explode in some possibly unknown way. The reality, those powers behind the scenes that are using this to change the course of the world, and ultimately, specifically, the way that monetary energy, life energy, is exchanged between people. What's money? It just represents your time in labor, an investment of past labor, old money, or present labor with the new money. But it still comes back to, it just represents some form of energy that's being exchanged. The oil is the energy of choice for the world because it's the cheapest way to do production, to make things happen currently. And it's a choke point for the way that the energy flows through the world to make production happen. I think there's two things in play. Number one, the way that we operate machines, run factories, heat our houses, all these other things, while it may not be here yet for a change to other alternatives, it's not 1,000 years away. It's not 500 years away. If we said it was 50 to 100 years away, the way these people think, that's tomorrow. So they're anticipating that. They're getting that last moment of energy from this current system before they switch into something new and reinvent themselves in this phoenix sense. So what we're seeing is people making the preparations to reinvent the world. And in the course of doing that, they're going to crack a few eggs. They're going to change the way that we operate. They're going to take some players out. So let's look at Saudi Arabia specifically. Saudi Arabia, the people running Saudi Arabia, were a creation of our CIA, our State Department, our Dulles brothers, and others. And they created this control point, this leverage point for oil flow, energy flow throughout the world, and pricing. They didn't have to control all the energy in the world. They just had to control the lowest cost energy in order to have leverage over the rest of the energy or oil across the world. That leverage point has worked fairly well, especially in the last 40 years post Nixon. But we, like others here in the group have said, we're reaching the end of that current play. And so we're in that death throes when people are on the operating table in some crisis being triaged. They oftentimes find extra strength almost superhuman strength in those death throes, trying to survive the trauma, the damage that they've encountered before they either expire or somehow conk out. We're seeing a system that's in that mode. Who was running CIA and who was running the Mideast? Aramco is the Arab American Oil Corporation. That was a Rockefeller entity, essentially controlled by them. All of these events we're seeing here in the West, in the US, all of these agencies, all of these personalities, I will just tell you that each of these recent presidents was controlled by this Rockefeller cartel. The across the world, these players that are being exposed with WikiLeaks and other things, primarily, not exclusively, but primarily, are Rockefeller entities. And we're seeing in the background, behind the scenes, a Rothschild play. And so as we look at where the power is shifting to in this current situation, I believe that we're seeing a power play between the two biggest of the families and then the other families behind them in a Rockefeller Rothschild scenario. And that while we're looking at individual players like Trump, Putin, the reality is behind the scenes, we're seeing an incredible, almost like mob gang wars. Is the headlines of the latest mobster dead on the street beside his limo with his driver. The reality is that we're seeing a huge power play for the next 50 to 100 years between these massive family mobs that control whole countries and whole economies. And if you wanted to say what's the core of the Rockefeller mob, it's their ability to control the price of oil, starting with Saudi Arabia. If you clean house there, you clean house everywhere else. So the dramas taking place may have started here in the U.S. with the exposure via WikiLeaks of some of the Clinton shenanigans and all of their various players up through Obama and the Bush shenanigans. The reality is that it's coming home to roost in Saudi Arabia because that's the core, that's the main moneymaker for this cabal. And if they lose power there, they go down many notches. It doesn't mean they're going to be destroyed. This isn't a battle to destruction between the families. This is a battle for domination. And the more powerful, larger family has always been that Rothschild family. And think of it this way. The city of London, which the Rothschilds control with the banking, in a very real way, the city of London for the United States, Rockefeller side of the cabal, is Riyadh. Because we send our leaders there and they kiss the ring, they kiss the hand, they bow the head to these leaders in Riyadh. But even those leaders are just figureheads because it's the people behind the Saudi figureheads that are actually pulling the strings, this larger family operation. So we are seeing our City of London, version of City of London, being decimated by what's going on right now. And this new power center emerging, I don't think it's decentralized. I think it's being centralized, but only to a different family group, a Commonwealth group, if you will, ultimately that's going to come out, and it's going to be based out of the City of London.
All right. Let's start back up at the top. So let's go to you, Ken. Any feedback? Great insights there, Ken. Questions, feedback?
No, I'm in full agreement with that. A lot of things, proxies. If you really think about it, there was an interesting thing I came across in listening to a podcast. I can't remember who it was from, but they were talking about they're still pro-Israel despite all the different things that the Israeli state has done ever since it came out in 1948. And one of the interesting things that they pointed out was that the supreme leader of Iran has written a book that he wants to get rid of Israel. Well, most people cannot differentiate between the Jewish person and the state that is Israel. And if you take a look even at going back at a lot of the speeches, and I really studied this when I wrote my book, The Israel Deception, Ahmadinejad, most of his speeches were not about killing the Jew. It was about eradicating the Zionist state. And if you think about it, the Balfour Agreement, we're at the point last week, we had the 100-year anniversary of the Balfour Agreement, 100-year anniversary of the Communist Revolution, in that frequency shift I was talking about. And one of the purposes behind World War I was to break up the Ottoman Empire, to create these nation states that could be controlled by their governments and allow Rothschild to get into Israel and form it a state. And so with that being said, ever since then, Iran, what is now Persia, later Iran, when they changed the name, was part of the Ottoman Empire, and they function fine. Even today, Jews who live within Iran are not persecuted. They pretty much can't be part of government, but they function fine in the society. It's never been about the Jew. It's been about the Rothschild and Zionist political movement that created Israel and the turmoil that the state of Israel has kept in the Middle East for the last 70 years. And so when you're starting to see this whole geopolitical thing change, not only is the United States starting to fall as an empire, you're starting to see the Rothschild controlled, and as W said, the Rockefeller, these cabals are starting to crack, and that's also including the state of Israel itself.
Well, London Paul, thoughts? Yeah, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, W.
Well, I don't know that I would say that the Rothschild cabal is collapsing. I think that there may be places where they're giving ground, but the reality is that even this situation where these hidden alliances are, to say that suddenly, as Netanyahu said the other day, that we're going to see alliances that nobody thought possible, where the Saudis and the Israelis are suddenly working together, and some of the other nearby kingdoms. The reality is those relationships have been there all along behind the scenes, and just weren't in the forefront, weren't put in people's faces. But we're at this moment now where those are all being revealed. And some of what's occurring here is that in a card game, at a certain point, you got to start revealing your cards. You got to start putting them on the table. That's what's happening. And so we're coming to the moment where the pot's full. All of the bets have been placed and hedged, and now it's time to reveal the cards. And that's what's happening in these next few events, is this who's got what in their hand, and which side's going to win. And the Mideast is, for all that Korea's an issue, for all that there's an Asian issue, and that I think will come into play somewhere down the road. That's a different pot. For the moment, while we might get distracted for brief periods to other parts of the world, the real game is the Mideast. Ultimately, it is about Saudi Arabia. Ultimately, it is about the dollar, because before you can create a new world order, you first have to eradicate, decimate the old world order. And that's what's occurring. And we're seeing it systematically, whether you're talking Hollywood's influence over the world, our politicians' influence over the world, our dollar influence over the world, and our military influence over the world. You mentioned the situation where the threats were made about sinking our entire fleet in the Pacific. The reality is that's a lot easier than Americans would like to think. It's outside of most Americans' paradigm to believe that we could lose huge percentages of our military in not days or even hours, but minutes. And the strategies that were in play, it's akin to people trying to come to a knife fight and somebody brings a machine gun. The reality is that the French, look at the French's confidence coming into World War II. They built this incredible Maginot Line, unbelievable. And everybody in France was absolutely confident there was no danger from the Germans. They're all their buddies, and the Maginot Line was impenetrable. That's the Americans' attitude about the dollar, the military, and their position in the world with State Department and the presidency. The reality is that's our Maginot Line, and that line is highly vulnerable at this point to new tactics and innovation. In that case, air and artillery mobility. For us in the world, our dollar Maginot Line is highly vulnerable. And I go back to my experiences in taking out the ruble, and in the broader thing where we had this plan to take out the Russian economy. We went after their oil. We reduced oil prices to the point where they couldn't sustain. They had to stop all the projects. They didn't have cash coming in. We pumped them full of cash with glasnost and ran it through the mobs. And then we cut it off at a critical moment and starved them out. And it collapsed. The U.S. this is water sloshing in a tub. The energy is coming back at us. This situation in the Mideast, we've built this huge belief that we can control the energy prices over the whole world, and now it's sloshing back. And the danger to us as Americans is not to recognize the extent of the threat against us, because we're locked into old thinking that was instituted over many, many decades, this insularity attitude. And the reality is here, and it's going to be very brutal very shortly. End the play. The place that it's going to have to start when the rubber really meets the road is Saudi Arabia and the Mideast.
London Paul, your thoughts?
Well, you're probably going to know what I'm going to say, but look, the reality is the Rothschilds are absolutely loathed and despised by the Russians and the Chinese, and there are two reasons why. The Russian Revolution was engineered by the Rothschilds. It was to remove the Tsars and steal the entire wealth because of the nation, because at the time, the Tsars were the richest people in the world. And the purpose was to implement and invoke communism into the nation to effectively neutralize its capability to rise against the West. The Russians absolutely, when I say they hate them, they despise them. The Chinese hate them equally for the Opium Wars, and they will have nothing to do with any Western cabal. The Western cabal is, and this is why is everything about Russia? It is about Russia because the cabal, whether it's the Rockefellers, whether it's the Rothschilds, they hate the Russians equally as much as the Russians hate them. And there is no way that what the Russia and China would ever do acquiesce to the cabal. That's why they fought wars to prevent. They would fight to the last person on this planet to defend their sovereignty of their nations. And what's happening now is that we've seen the end of the cabal in its entirety. Doesn't matter whether they're Rockefellers, Rothschilds, it doesn't really matter who they are. They are finished. It is the end. And the multipolar world is not about having hegemony. It is, yes, you're absolutely right, it's the death of the dollar, because the dollar is what they control the world with. That will die. With it, they will die. And in the process, this is exactly why they tried to get rid of Trump. It's not the Rothschilds trying to get rid of Trump. It's the American neocons trying to get rid of Trump. Why? Because he's going to drain the swamp and kill them. And in the process, he'll take all of them down. Because whether we like it or not, the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, they're not that separate. Yeah, they have their own agendas, but they have to work very closely together. They have to cooperate to a certain extent in the world, or they wouldn't have never achieved anything. So I have no problem or any concern in that regard. The multipolar world was about destroying the dollar. And the fact is that the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers could be destroyed in 10 seconds if China went, right, we're pulling the plug on the dollar, it's game over. They could quite easily do that. They haven't done it for all the reasons why, because they wanted to build a multipolar world that integrates everybody, whether it's the UK, whether it's Europe, whether it's the US. That is the ambition. But if it didn't work, they would have pulled the plug. But now I think we're reaching a point where we think it's possible to integrate the US into that. Certainly, yeah, no doubt that Britain has a history with the City of London, and we're not disputing that. But this is the end of it. Once the dollar dies, and you reset the financial system to sound money, which is coming, the cabal, whoever they are finished. It's game over. Bye bye. The world is rid of you. And for me, that is absolutely what's happening. So I can understand fear. There's a lot of idea that the cabal are rotating from west to east. It's just never going to happen.
Well, let me just. So your point on the hatred of these family cabals is absolutely correct. There's a visceral hate by the people in both Russia and in China for these family cabals, because, like any mob, it's not their mob. That said, the Bolshevik Revolution was carried out by people that were believed lies, but became the hands and feet of outsiders to overturn Russia. Mao went to Tavistock and trained at Tavistock for a period of time when he was outside China, and then went back and did the things that he did. When I see the city of London occupied by some type of multinational world police force, I'll believe that the Rothschilds are toast. The reality is these families are extremely wealthy beyond comprehension almost. And to think that they have not anticipated this moment in time, realizing that there's real risk for them, to try and control the moment and be ahead of the moment, I think that would be a weak on our part to not give them credit for being able to anticipate some of these things and trying to manipulate the attitudes of the world covertly to come around to their way of thinking, this Hegelian dialectic, problems, crisis, solution. So can we be tricked into making a wrong turn, believing a lie, doing something that we think is in our best interest, takes out the cabal? In reality, it's just the phoenix reinventing itself a different way. And new players that are actually the old players, just in new disguises, taking some type of control over the direction of the world. I think that's my perspective, is that's our concern. Will they ultimately win? No, I believe they lose. I believe they get wiped out. I believe the world cleans themselves of these parasites, and we do have a bright future ahead. But that being said, it won't be without some horrendously bloody conflict and destruction, both of people and of wealth, in these moments, as each side plays their cards in this gambit. And that's my concern. Just how destructive is this cleansing process going to be? Draining the swamp. Not all of these people are going to go easily or readily or willingly to be destroyed. And even the situation in Saudi Arabia with the house cleaning going on there. Have we, seen all of the house cleaning that's going to happen? Is there going to be some pushback from a direction that wasn't anticipated by those people being taken out of power? Maybe they still have some connections that could still add new dramas. And I will add this, there was mention of the missile strike into Saudi Arabia, and that was assisted with by covert operatives, most likely CIA, in firing this alleged Iranian missile. There's all sorts of false flags that can occur here. Is war by Hezbollah in their best interest at this moment in time? No, their fighters are spread out across northern Syria in large measure, and this isn't the moment that they want to go to war. They're consolidating their wins. Is this in the best interest of Israel? They're not gonna win a fight with Hezbollah. Is it in the best interest of Iran? Why would Iran do anything to shoot themselves in the foot when their enemies are all coming off the rails all by themselves without any help? Hardly. We could look at almost every player involved and the individual players. It is not in their individual interests to get into a militarized conflict at all at this moment in time. But behind the scenes, between the cabals, there is an interest to bring these things to a point of conflict, just like it wasn't in the interests of Europe in a broad sense to go into World War I or World War II. The people behind the scenes had a plan and baited the various people into it. We know now that, just like Gulf of Tonkin, it was a manufactured event. Pearl Harbor, we could have avoided that. We had intelligence that was coming. We knew it was going to happen and how it was going to happen. But the powers that be intended that we were going to get into a war, and the mass of people bought the illusion, the magician's trick, the wizardry to fool us with this hair trigger moment into some kind of a significant conflict. Do I think what's coming in the Mideast right now is World War III? No. It is the prelude to World War III because from the cabal standpoint, whatever dust up happens right now sets the stage for everybody to bring all sorts of stuff to the Mideast for the real conflict, which isn't too far off in the future.
Okay, I've got a question. I've just got a question. Who is going to start World War III?
Well, I think that's a great question. I mean, I think ultimately, from my perspective, that World War III is started by the cabals behind the scenes with some false flags. I don't think that.
No, but I mean, who's actually? I mean, Russia and China are not going to get sucked into a world war because they're not going to fall for this. They know. So if they're not going to play in a world war, who's going to fight this war?
Well, I think it's a super valid point. I mean, Russia, I think in this dust up that's going to happen here very shortly, I think Russia's going to stay on the sidelines. They're just going to watch and do nothing almost. And I think to a great extent, I don't necessarily think that the U.S. is going to get heavily involved other than perhaps some bomb runs in Yemen and support there, and then munitions into Israel if Hezbollah does something. But I think that this dust up is coming. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I just want to elbow in a little bit. I think the blueprint here, in terms of this whole, cabal, Rockeberger, Rothberger, and all these other idiots, let's look at the whole scenario with the Hezbollah nonsense. 2006, Operation Cast Lead. That was a disaster from every conceivable situation in Israel. And that was with the IDF then, when it was the vaunted IDF. Now it's the transgendered queer IDF, with a couple of really good brigades, and the rest of them are a bunch of ninnies. Okay, the only brigade that performed well in Cast Lead were the Golani brigade, and the Sheatet 13. Those guys, they did very well. The entire IDF was held at bay by not the entire Hezbollah, by only one battalion. Okay. The Abd Madar Brigade is the only battalion that held the entire IDF off. And then at night, they ran 2-man hunter-killer teams where they took Cornet missiles and older versions of Cornet missiles, and they were setting off Merkava tanks like they were Roman candles. The Israeli Air Force, now they have the vaunted F-35 Flying Turkey that's going to be joining them when it's not on the ground being serviced for the next 90 hours. But the Israeli Air Force, they couldn't do nothing. The American command at that point received a call, and I forgot the name of the Joint Chiefs at that time. But this Joint Chiefs, they sat there and they knew that immediately that Israel was in trouble because they depleted most of their munitions. So when they depleted most of their munitions, they got the call. Washington got the call, and they had to supply them with more munitions, more smart bombs, more precision guided stuff, because they were practically being depleted. It was a huge debacle. And from 2006 till today, what has happened with the Hezbollah, you're talking about one of the most highly trained guerrilla armies on the planet. Trying
Not
to fight
one
them.
of the most highly trained guerrilla force on the planet, yes.
Yes, it is. It is the most highly trained. Trying to fight these guys on their backyard. And if you know, like I have a buddy of mine in the IDF, he'll tell you right now, it is a social experiment. It's a joke what's happening with the IDF currently, okay? Except for the special ops units here and there. But how many can you actually field is the question. What is the U.S. going to do? China pops the dollar bubble. It's over, okay? There's nothing that can be done with any sort of force in the Middle East. You know, Russia's checkmated the U.S. and the deep state all over the Middle East, all up and down. You're seeing it being neutralized in Korea. You're seeing it even be neutralized in a large part domestically. That's number one. Number two, when we're talking about the Rothbugers and the Rothsteins, how do they benefit in a multipolar world? Case in point, as I speak to you guys now, as the audience listens to my voice, there are dozens of very brilliant individuals out there that are right now working feverishly to decentralize the internet, and they even have some of these intranets already set up, where your personal smartphone becomes an encrypted, with elliptical encryption, okay, the same one we use for our gold USB, okay, encrypted server. That server right now, it becomes an internet thing, kind of like almost like a peer-to-peer. There are smart individuals, and people are thinking, okay, it's Bitcoin. Bitcoin, for all we know, and I'm a firm believer of this, Bitcoin, for all I know and for all I care, could be the MySpace or the Friendster of cryptocurrencies. It's not Bitcoin. It could be something further that's more private. But the point is, the genie's out of the bottle, and I think Ken earlier on said this. There's a frequency shift. In terms of everything that these Kabbalah, there's a Freudian slip right there, and anything,
like that. I'll use it.
Yeah, anything what these Kabbalists are doing, they're failing. So the only thing that I see conceivable for these crazies to do is to disappear for the next 100 years and probably emerge back. I mean, I'm reminded. I wonder what the last words of David Rockefeller. I wonder what was the last word he said before he croaked and slipped into eternity, facing facing judgment. I wonder what the last word is. I know what the last word was of Brzezinski. One of the last things he said is that his chessboard is a total failure. So it's a new world. I think the only thing these Kabbalah idiots can do is disappear for the next 50 to 100 years, and hopefully there's a world for these morons to return to. But right now, for them to pull off anything grandiose, besides an economic collapse in the United States and in Western Europe, I don't see anything past that.
Hey guys, real quick, we're going to go ahead and we have about 20, 25 minutes left, so I want to go ahead and start back up at the top and give everyone an opportunity with the discussion that's currently going on, and then any closing thoughts, and we'll start right back up at the top of the order. So Ken Schortgen Jr., if you could go ahead and give you the next 5 minutes, and then London Paul, you're next. So go for it, Ken.
Yeah. By the way, V, the last thing that David Rockefeller said was, "Ray Kurzweil, you bastard." because he didn't get the singularity done in time.
No, he didn't. The bastard with his 9 heart transplants.
Look, one of the things, we've been talking about Saudi Arabia, we talk about China, Russia, but there's a number of different things. The Brexit, I think, is going to have a huge play because Europe is separating itself from the city of London. Businesses from London are looking to leave en masse. But one of the interesting things that's not being addressed is how China is coming in and taking over many of the infrastructures. The LME, the London Metals Exchange, contrary to the name, is a Hong Kong-based subsidiary. They are now part of the daily silver fix, and they came very close to running the whole benchmark determination of price. We have interesting. There was a dichotomy that took place last week in Venezuela. Russia renegotiated the bonds that and the debt that Venezuela owed them, and then Venezuela then defaulted on the U.S. and the Western debt. So Russia is making its move already, consolidating Venezuela in the Western Hemisphere into the Eurasian cabal. We also see China. China just made some new deals with Cuba. Trump and the rest of them are trying to throw away the détente that Obama at least opened up with Cuba, and it's opening up China to move in. Now, here's an interesting thing. The U.S. had the audacity back in the early 19th century to declare the Monroe Doctrine, that they will intervene with anything that happens in the Western Hemisphere. So why does China not have the same sovereign right to do so in the South China Sea and in that region? So this is something that, is going to be interesting to look at. And finally, we haven't touched upon something that is going around, though probably most people on this podcast here are believers in it, while some in the alternative media are not, and that's China's intended oil for yuan denominated contract convertible to gold. Now, the one thing that also went under the radar was the gold markets between Shenzhen and Hong Kong were established. What is that? What is the importance of that? Well, through the Shanghai Gold Exchange, you really can't take gold out of China. You can purchase it, you can have it stored there, but China is not allowing it to go. But by having the connection between London and Shenzhen, now you have the potential for trade to go between the mainland and Hong Kong, and then you have it deliverable outside through Hong Kong, which has a little bit of autonomy. The other thing about the contract is most people think, well, there's not enough gold for countries to be able to do that. No, the purpose behind the gold contract is to use the futures market at the Shanghai Gold Exchange to hedge the price of your oil trading contracts in the yuan denominated currency. So I think there's been a lot of misinterpretation of what this whole thing is about. But it's simply the next step to give an alternative for places like Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, the OPEC nations, and then, of course, Turkey, et cetera, to voluntarily bypass the dollar. And once this oil contract supposedly is supposed to be by the end of the year, if it is successful going into 2018, I think then we are going to see nearly all commodities traded going to do the same type of yuan denominated contract, and that is going to be the final nail in the petrodollar scheme.
Excellent. London Paul.
Well, yeah, I'd echo obviously what Ken said. Absolutely, that is the case. Yeah, the yuan denominated contract for oil backed by gold is a reality. I've actually read some stuff that the Chinese wrote, and that isn't published in the Western media for obvious reasons, and it's absolutely the case. People have got it confused. So it is a reality, and we're not that far off it becoming a reality in terms of its implementation. That's probably why we've seen this last hurrah in regards to Saudi and trying to stoke tensions in the Middle East. Because at the end of the day, the whole point was to create the caliphate via Daesh in the Middle East, to completely redraw the map of the Middle East. That was the cabal's big aim, and it has absolutely failed. And they can try, yes, they could stoke a problem. They may start a war. There is always that risk, and we said we can't rule it out. But they failed. They failed in Ukraine to destroy the Russians in terms of their economy. They failed in terms of Afghanistan. They failed in Iraq. They failed in North Korea. The list is endless, and the idea that they were just going to smash the dollar, bring a new dollar out, and well, if they were going to do that and destroy the whole Western economy and the Western financial system, they could have done it in 2008. They could have just said, we'll sink all the banks. Oh, sorry, the world's collapsed. The Western financial system's collapsed. The whole world's collapsed. We're going to have to bring out a one world currency. They didn't. And they spent the last 9 years doing everything they can to protect the dollar. Well, that game's up to all intents and purposes. So they never were going to try and destroy the financial system that made them what they are. There was no point to doing that. And there was no intention of doing that. Because all they did in the last intervening 9 years is strengthen Russia's hand, strengthens China's hand, to the point now they're the dominant players. So there's no sense that there was some great big 4D chess game the cabal were playing. Ultimately, it's the birth of sound money. It's the death of fiat currency. It's the death of US hegemony, and it's the death of hegemony, full stop. It's the birth of a multipolar world. And there's still a long way to go. China has problems. Russia has problems. But they recognize those problems, but they're taking huge, gigantic strides forward. That's why they have such popular leadership. And people say, well, China's this totalitarian dictatorship. It has a one-party state. But if they don't toe the line, the Chinese people would have a revolution and remove them. And the Chinese Communist Party knows that. And that's why they keep having to reinvent themselves and realizing that as they rotate the Chinese economy, they have to look after the Chinese people's interests. And hence, we've said this many times, 700 million people taken out of poverty is not the actions of a totalitarian government. And Russia, Putin is immensely popular because of what he's done to remove the cabal and all the oligarchs. In 17 years, he's transformed the country. He survived the onslaught of the cabal to destroy the Russian economy and actually turned it on them and strengthened the Russian economy and destroyed the cabal's Western economies in the process. In terms of the European Union, Brexit, yeah, it was a big important event for one reason. It was really, in a way, the catalyst for the destruction of the European Union. Ultimately, Britain leaving the European Union via Brexit won't matter because the European Union will be dead and buried before Brexit ever happens in 2019. But it's set a motion, it's set a catalyst in place. You're looking at Catalonia. As much as they've arrested and imprisoned a whole bunch of the parliament, and they're trying to get an extradition order for Puigdemont, the reality is we had 1 million people protesting in Barcelona to release these people in prison. It's another catalyst. Europe will fall apart as the European Union. They'll come back together, glued together, as a European Union should have always been. What was the old European, well, the European economic, well, was it? No, got it wrong. The European Common Market, sorry, which is about nations trading together, working together. We'll see the rebirth of the old empires, not like they were, but in a manner of speaking, as they were, because they're going to redraw the map and unfold it as it was 100 years ago, which was, we said, was the whole purpose of World War I. The US, it's got major problems, but I'm confident that it can weather this storm. Russia and China, by the recent trip to by Trump to the Far East, was an olive branch to say, if you can dig yourself out of this mess, we'll help you. If you don't, we can't help. But if you stab us in the back, we'll destroy you. And I don't think that might sound harsh, but that's a reasonable attitude to have. The question is, how quickly does Trump get in to drain the swamp? I think we may be more pleasantly surprised than we imagine. I'm not saying when, because I don't know, but I think maybe sooner than we realize. Once that dam's broken in terms of draining the swamp, and if you appeal to the average American who realizes, well, actually, my country's been completely ruthlessly manipulated by this cabal deep state, they're not going to tolerate it. And very quickly, once that collapses, the nation will galvanize behind Trump and realize, okay, we were misled. I mean, not to say Trump doesn't have support, and I'm not saying Trump's perfect, far from it, but he represents the attitude of, he was a self-made guy. They couldn't buy him off. They couldn't corrupt him. They couldn't bribe him. That's why they wanted rid of him. And he survived this long. If he survives a bit longer and the whole process of draining the swamp begins, then the US will have a fighting chance to be part of the world and not suffer the risk of the death of the dollar, the devalued dollar, and the destruction of the way of life for the American people. Yeah, we want the destruction of the way of life of the cabal. But the last thing you want to do is have an American nation that spends a decade or 2 decades trying to get back on its feet. That's not good for anyone. It's not good for the world. But I think there is real, genuine optimism that we will turn that around. We will see the rebirth of the American nation as it should have been. And if we do, it's going to make the world a much better place, because America needs to be. And it's not, like America is a special nation or anything like that, but America needs to be at the forefront of a multipolar world, because every nation will benefit from it, and not just the American people.
Very good, Paul. Thank you for that. V, your thoughts, closing thoughts.
My closing thoughts are, I think, I agree with what London Paul is saying, in the sense that I think we could be pleasantly surprised. There's a lot of things that are happening. Like right now, I was able to chance to see video of actual police going in and out of Tony Podesta's residency. Things are happening. Exactly how it will play out will be very interesting, to say the least. And I think we could be pleasantly surprised. My hope and prayer is this: that we see some silver bracelets placed on some key individuals. Number one. Number two, I think handcuffing and putting in prison these key individuals like your Clintons and whatnot is very good for the morale of the country. I think the world would be cheering. It would be a great morale boost for the American public, because then we'll know that our laws actually work. And it'll be a very good thing for all of us nationally. We get these cretins removed between these arrests that are coming, and as well as the 2018 midterm elections. If we can get these curmudgeons out of office, then we stand a great chance of transitioning from what we're about to go through economically and geopolitically speaking. If no arrest comes, and if it's as business as usual, and 2018 comes and goes, then you know what? Well, I guess all bets are off at that point. But for the time being, I'm hopeful.
Well said. Well said. W.
Well, I think everybody
Go ahead.
that there is cabal wars going on, whether it's you look at it as one cabal or factions of a broader cabal, and that we're seeing these conflicts playing out in the form of these proxy wars by members of the deep state, the various mob families, if you will. I don't expect what's coming next to come in a linear sense. All eyes are on North Korea, Asia, on the Mideast. I actually expect this next event to come from someplace we aren't anticipating it right now in most of the Western European media, which was touched on briefly by Ken, South America. There's stuff going on in Argentina right now that is almost unheard of up here in the States. But they're going after some of the connections to Iran and Hezbollah that were involved in bombings in Argentina a couple decades ago. And that's erupting, and it plays into all of those states there in the region. The thing that I'm looking for that's telegraphed, just like I hit the numbers on this October 28th to November 6th beginning of this blow up, there's another date up here of November 22nd. It's just a big deal, and I'm not going to waste time explaining why that exact date is a concern, but there's a concern there. I expect whatever's coming next to come in the form of a false flag that affects the world from multiple locations, and in a manner similar to almost a 9/11 type thing. Was 9/11 what we were told it was? No. And we today look at that, and anybody that's actually honest about 9/11 is, I think, in agreement that we were played and it wasn't as portrayed. Yet we went to two huge wars in the Mideast, and we haven't extracted ourselves from that yet. We were gamed. Whatever's coming here shortly, we're going to be gamed again. And the question is whether we recognize that gaming early enough to neutralize those people that would like to reshape the world again in their favor. I think they fail, as everybody on the panel agreed. I don't think they succeed in what they're about to try to do, ultimately. But that doesn't mean they're not going to try to do it. It may be the only hand that they've maneuvered themselves into a position to be able to have to play next. So if that's the case, we need to realize that there is real danger. And it's not just a game board in somebody's den that we're playing on. These are real lives. This is our real future that's on the line here. And this is for everything, life and limb, everything worth having, everything worth being in this world is on the line here. And when you mentioned Tony Podesta, getting searched in his house, Hillary, Bill, the Bushes, whatever, this is the only hand they have left in this cabal situation. They're not going to just take it lightly. They're going to play for everything because everything is on the line. And we can't be naive in thinking they haven't anticipated some of our responses and actions and dialed them into the way they're going to play the game. This is a dangerous moment, more dangerous than most of us can believe. And if there's going to be turkey roasted here in the U.S., it could very well be an F-35 turkeys. It could be real problems we just aren't seeing. So I'm very concerned that these war drums are not going to be for naught. I'm afraid that, unfortunately, something is going to happen very shortly here. It is going to send us off on a course that we really don't want to go, that isn't in our best interest or any of the other players' best interests, but we're going to be forced into this by these powers behind the scenes. This mob war is going to escalate, and it isn't going to be pretty, and we're going to be in the middle of it, in the middle of the crossfire, and the dollar is the primary target at this exact moment.
Very good. I want to thank all of our fans, all of our listeners for listening in today. Also want to again issue an apology to Dr. Jim Willie. We will try our hardest to get an interview scheduled with him as soon as possible. Also to our panel, so the Daily Economist, thank you so much. London Paul, thank you as well. V and W. So thank everyone. Enjoy your afternoon and take care. We're over and out.